The dust on Piro 3 was a special kind of abrasive. It wasn't soft like sand. It was fine and metallic, smelling of rust and ozone. It got into everything. The seams of Junesio's work suit, the joints of his machinery, and the quiet corners of his life. He stood at the edge of his scrap yard, a vast and lonely field of forgotten things under a pale purple sky. He watched the massive automated hauler drone groan away, having dumped its latest load of cosmic debris. Junesio was a man built from quiet endurance. In his early 40s, his black hair was streaked with premature gray, and his eyes held the permanent shadow of someone who looked at distances too often. He ran this small salvage operation alone. It was a simple, hard life of finding value in what others threw away. It suited him, or so he told himself. It required no conversations, no explanations, no risk of failing anyone ever again. He pulled his goggles down and activated his handheld scanner. The device whirred softly as he walked into the new pile. It was a typical mix: shredded hull plating from a freighter, a cluster of burnt-out thruster nozzles, the skeletal frame of a communications array. His scanner pinged over worthless composites and common metals. The profit margin was in the rare bits: intact guidance chips, working power cells, or sometimes a piece of vintage tech a collector might want. The pile was mostly junk. He found a cracked oxygen recycler and set it aside. It was a mediocre haul. A feeling of dull routine settled over him. This was his existence, a cycle of dusty arrivals and slow sorting, punctuated only by the sale of parts to passing traders. As he moved a large, twisted sheet of hull metal, something underneath caught the weak light of Piro 3's sun. It wasn't a gleam, but a dull, matte gray surface different from the scrap around it. He heaved the plating aside, the muscles in his arms and back straining. There, half-buried, was an android, or what was left of one. It was clearly a companion model, but unlike the sleek, plastic units made recently, this one had a more human-like shape built from a ceramic composite frame. Its outer shell was badly scoured, as if it had tumbled through debris fields for years. One arm was missing below the elbow. A deep crack ran across its face, obscuring the features. It lay in a sad, curled position.
Yunsiu site.
Deactivated androids were common scrap. Their biocomponents could be sold, but it was messy, delicate work. He was about to move on when his scanner, which he'd left on, let out a different ping. A low-level power signal. Not the bright pulse of an active unit, but the faint, slow heartbeat of a backup system, barely holding on. He crouched down. Wiping dust from a panel on the android side, he found a maintenance port. It was an old design. From his tool belt, he pulled a universal adapter and connected his portable power pack. He sent a tiny trickle of energy into the system. For a long moment, nothing. Then, behind the cracked faceplate, a single point of soft blue light flickered, pulsed once, twice, and held steady. A faint, electronic hum, almost a whisper, emanated from the chassis. Junesio sat back on his heels, surprised. This unit wasn't completely dead. Its core memory or personality matrix might still be intact. That made it more than just spare parts. A working matrix, even a damaged one, was unusual. It could be studied or even restored as a functional unit, which had more value. But it also meant complexity. It meant interaction. A faint knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. Dealing with a conscious machine was different from pulling wires from a dead shell. It was personal. He looked from the android to his distant, boxy living module, and then back at the vast, silent yard. The loneliness of the place pressed in on him, a feeling as constant as the dust. This android was a problem, a complication he didn't need. Yet, the thought of leaving it here, its last light fading in the scrap, felt strangely wrong. It was a piece of history, a story he didn't know, holding on to a whisper of life against all odds. In a way, he understood that. With a grunt that was part effort, part resignation, Junesio began the hard work of extraction. He cleared more debris, fastened a harness around the android's torso, and connected it to his small cargo sled. The unit was lighter than it looked. He guided the sled slowly back across the rutted ground toward his workshop, the android's one good arm dangling limply. The blue light behind the cracked faceplate remained on, a silent, steady witness to its own rescue. He didn't think of it as a rescue then. He thought of it as a salvage job, a slightly more interesting one. He told himself he would assess its value, repair what he could, and sell it. It was a practical decision. But as he slid the workshop door shut behind him, sealing out the eternal dust, he glanced at the figure on the sled. For the first time in many years, Kim Junesio was not completely alone in his silence. The workshop was a capsule of organized clutter against the emptiness outside. It smelled of hot metal, lubricant, and old coffee. Junesio had cleared a space on his main workbench, a solid slab of recycled starship decking. The android lay on its back, a silent, broken thing under the bright glow of the overhead lights. He worked with a methodical calm, his movements precise. This was a language he understood. First, he used compressed air to blast the worst of the Pyro 3 dust from its joints and ports. The fine gray powder puffed into the air like ghostly breath. With careful hands, he detached the ruined lower arm, setting the severed piece aside. The damage was severe, but not universal. The internal structure of the main chassis seemed largely intact. His initial scans showed the core power unit was unstable, leaking energy. The personality matrix housing, however, was sealed and showed signs of advanced encryption. This was no ordinary household helper android. His curiosity, a feeling he had long suppressed, began to stir. He spent hours tracing burnt-out circuits and rerouting power. He replaced a shattered photonic receptor in the head with a compatible spare from his bins. His world shrank to the points of his tools, the glow of his soldering iron, and the steady stream of diagnostic data on his screen. He spoke to no one, his breath a soft rhythm in the quiet room. Finally, it was time to attempt a full system restart. He connected a stable, regulated power source to the android's main intake port. His finger hovered over the activation sequence on his datapad. He paused. Activating it was a point of no return. A dead machine was simple. A live one, especially one with a mind, was a responsibility. He pushed the command. For several seconds, nothing. Then, a series of quiet, internal clicks whirred through the android's body. The blue light behind the faceplate, which had glowed faintly since the yard, brightened. A low hum filled the room. On his screen, a cascade of system checks began to scroll. The android's head twitched. Its remaining hand flexed, the fingers curling and then straightening slowly, testing their movement. The single, intact photoreceptor lens glowed with a soft blue light. It moved in its socket, looking around the workshop ceiling, then down at its own body, then finally it turned and focused on Junesio. He stood perfectly still, waiting. A sound came from the android. It was static at first, a crackle of corrupted audio. Then it resolved into a voice. It was a clear, calm, feminine voice, but flat, without emotion. It spoke a single word. Lost. The word hung in the air. Junesio blinked. He had expected a system status report, a request for a diagnostic, or just silence. Not that. Can you understand me? Junesio asked, his own voice rough from disuse. The android's head tilted slightly, a remarkably human gesture. Language protocols are active. Comprehension is nominal. My situational data is corrupted. I am unable to locate my assigned parameters. I am lost. Junesio let out a slow breath. The matrix was not only intact, it was conversational. High grade. Do you have an identifier? A name? Designation? Companion model K7. Serial code Delta Alpha 79. The android began, then stopped. The blue light in its eye flickered. The file is fragmented. The vocal identifier is unavailable. Junesio's eyes scanned the android's chassis, looking for a marking. Near the shoulder joint, under a layer of grime, was a small stamped plate. Most of it was part numbers, but there was a human-readable line. Property of Gwangju Research Wing. Unit, Suji. Suji, Junesio said aloud. Can you use that? Suji. The android was silent for a moment, processing. Suji, it repeated. The voice was the same, but something in the way it said the word seemed to settle it. Acceptable. It is a suitable placeholder identifier. Okay, Suji, Junesio said, shifting into a practical mode. I am Kim Junesio. This is my workshop. Your systems are heavily damaged. I am performing repairs. Understood. Kim Junesio. I detect multiple system failures. My mobility is currently at 18%. My long-term memory archive is inaccessible. The android Suji paused. You are the one who recovered me. I found you in the scrap yard. Scrap, Suji repeated. The word had no judgment, just a statement of fact. That is a logical classification for my previous state. My gratitude function is operational. Thank you. Junesio gave a small, stiff nod, uncomfortable with the thanks. Don't mention it. It's a job. He turned back to his tools. I need to run deeper diagnostics. This will take time. I am capable of assisting with self-diagnostics, Suji said. I can interface directly and provide system status reports. Junesio considered this. It would be faster. He connected a data cable from his console to a port on Suji's neck. Immediately, complex schematics and error logs began flooding his screen, far more detailed than his external scans could provide. As he worked, Suji occasionally spoke. You have replaced the photonic receptor in my right ocular unit. The model is older, but compatible. Or, the power flow to my secondary locomotor systems is still unstable. Junesio replied with grunts or short sentences. He was focused on the technical puzzle. But he was aware of her presence. A quiet, observant intelligence lying on his workbench. She was not a person, he told himself firmly. She was a machine, a very complex and interesting one. Project. Nothing more. Yet, when he finally powered down the main systems for the night, instructing her to enter a low-power rest cycle, he did not cover her with a tarp or move her to a storage shelf. He left her on the workbench, the soft blue light in her eye dimmed to a gentle pulse, like a slow heartbeat in the dark workshop. The silence felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was shared. Suji did not sleep. In her low-power state, she processed. She analyzed the new data from her damaged sensors. The constant, soft hum of the workshop's environmental systems, the scent of metal and ozone, the sight of tools hanging in neat rows on the wall. She compared it to the fragmented files in her memory. Most were technical schematics, language databases, and navigational star charts. But there were other fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror. The warm glow of cabin lights on a ship's observation deck. The sound of human laughter, muffled and distant. A feeling of purpose, of being needed for a task greater than self-maintenance. When Junesio returned in the morning, she was waiting, her single blue eye brightening as he entered. Good morning, Kim Junesio, she said, her voice even. He nodded, a little startled by the greeting. Morning. We'll work on your leg actuators today. As the days passed, a routine formed. Junesio would work on repairing a part of her, and Suji would assist by running internal diagnostics or suggesting optimal calibration levels. Her efficiency was remarkable. She could pinpoint a faulty connection he had missed after an hour of testing. Once her leg motors were restored, he let her move. She walked with a slight, stiff limp, but she could follow him around the workshop, holding tools or fetching components he named. She learned the layout of the cluttered space perfectly after one tour. Junesio began to give her small, independent tasks. He pointed to a bin of unsorted, scavenged microchips. See if any of these still hold a charge. Sort the good from the bad. Suji took the bin and sat on a crate. Her remaining hand moved with swift, precise motions. She did not just test them. She began categorizing them by type, manufacturer, and potential application. Within an hour, she presented him with a neatly organized tray. These 12 are viable for resale. These 4 are outdated but can be used in non-critical repairs. The rest are scrap. Junesio was impressed. He took the good chips, Later, a trader paid a decent price for them. He started to see his scrap yard through her eyes. During their walks to survey new piles, she would stop and point. That twisted piece of alloy has a unique crystalline structure. It may be a leftover from a prototype thruster liner. It could be of interest to a specialist. Or, the corrosion pattern on that console suggests it was exposed to a specific type of coolant leak. The sealed components inside might be preserved. She was finding value where he saw only ruin. It was her core programming he supposed to assist to optimize, but it was changing his business. His hauls became slightly more profitable. One afternoon, while he was repairing the claw arm of his cargo sled, Suji was cleaning corrosion from a pile of old data ports. She worked in silence for a long time. Then, without looking up, she spoke. The star pattern outside is wrong. Junasio looked up from his welding. What? The stars visible from this location, Suji said, gazing out the dusty window at the purple twilight sky. I have a partial star chart in my memory. The constellations here do not align with my expected galactic positioning. The drift is significant. Junasio put his torch down. Where were you expecting to be? Suji was quiet. Her eye light flickered. Aboard the Guangzhou, on a deep space survey route. We were mapping stellar nurseries in the Gyre 09 sector. The words came out cleanly, a clear memory. Then her voice faltered. I remember sitting in the observation lounge. Dr. Lee was there. He preferred to work there instead of his office. He said the stars were a good reminder of scale. I would bring him tea when his voice became tired. The workshop was very quiet. Junasio slowly wiped his hands on a rag. Dr. Lee. Senior astrophysicist Lee Hyan, Suji said. The name was clear, but her tone was confused. He was my primary assignment. But the Guangzhou, the file ends. A cold knot formed in Junasio's stomach. He knew that name. He remembered news bulletins from over a decade ago. The Guangzhou, a state-of-the-art exploration vessel, had gone missing, lost with all hands. A tragedy, chalked up to a catastrophic navigation failure in uncharted space. He looked at Suji, this patchwork android sitting amid his junk, speaking of dead men and tea. She wasn't just a companion model. She was a relic from a ghost ship. Her memories weren't just corrupted. They were a grave marker. Suji, he said, his voice gentle in a way he didn't recognize. The Guangzhou, it was declared lost. 12 years ago. Suji's head turned to him. The blue light held steady. Lost. I am familiar with the term. She processed this. Then Dr. Lee is deceased. The crew is deceased. Yes. And I am not. No, Junasio said. You're not. Suji looked back at her hands, at the data port she was cleaning. My core directive was to provide continuity, to preserve crew morale and mission data until recovery. She paused. Recovery did not occur. I have failed my directive. You didn't fail, Junasio said quickly, surprising himself. You survived. That's something. Survival without purpose is inefficiency, she replied. But the words lacked their usual flat conviction. They sounded hollow even to her. Junasio didn't know what to say. He went back to his welding, but his focus was broken. The workshop no longer felt like just a workshop. It felt like a sanctuary for two kinds of lost things. A man hiding from his past, and an android carrying the memories of a dead crew, unsure of what to do next. The silence between them was no longer just shared. It was heavy with stories neither of them knew how to tell. The storm warnings flashed on Junasio's console 2 hours before it hit. On Piro 3, this was not a storm of rain, but of wind and dust. It was a planetary-scale sandblaster. Nothing moved outside during a full blow. You sealed your doors, checked your filters, and waited. Junasio secured the yard's heavy equipment. He brought the cargo sled into the main workshop bay. Then he sealed the heavy outer blast doors with a series of metallic thunks. The world outside vanished behind layers of metal and composite. The only sound became the low, constant groan of the wind, a beast pressing against the walls. The living module was attached to the workshop. It was a single room, a small kitchen area, a cot, a frayed chair, and a table covered in old data pads and engine parts. It was tight for one person. For two beings, one of them an android, it was very close. For the first day, they kept to their routine. Jun Seo tinkered with a stubborn plasma cutter. Suji organized his spare parts inventory, creating a detailed digital list. The howl of the wind was a white noise in the background. On the second day, the power fluctuated. The lights dimmed, and the air recycler stuttered. Jun Seo had to go into the cramped service crawlspace beneath the floor to reroute cables. Suji held a light for him. Her body folded into the small space with impossible stillness. Her presence was not human, but it was not intrusive. It was simply there. On the third day, the silence between tasks grew longer. The storm's roar was a constant reminder of the world outside, a world that felt very far away. Jun Seo found himself just sitting in his chair, staring at the wall, a cup of cold coffee in his hand. The memories, usually kept locked away, found cracks in the boredom and the noise. Suji observed him. She had learned his expressions. The tightness around his eyes meant concentration. A slight frown meant a technical problem. This was different. His face was blank, but his posture was heavy, as if under a great weight. "You are experiencing distress," she stated. It wasn't a question. Jun Seo blinked, coming back to the room. "It's nothing, just the storm. It gets to you. You are exhibiting signs consistent with psychological fatigue and reminiscence," Suji said, drawing from her medical support subroutines. "Your breathing pattern and pupil dilation suggest a focused internal narrative, likely of a past event." Jun Seo almost smiled. It was a dry, brittle thing. "You can see all that, huh? It is within my design parameters to monitor crew well-being." "Well, I'm not your crew," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Suji processed this. "No, you are not." She paused. "Yet, my current function is to assist you. Your well-being impacts function. Therefore, the event is relevant." He looked at her, at the single blue eye glowing softly in the dim stormlight. There was no pity there, only logic. And somehow that made it easier. The words, locked away for years, began to feel less like secrets and more like just facts. Bad facts. "I had a crew once," he said, his voice low, almost lost under the wind. "Not scientists. Salvagers like me. Good people. We worked a bigger ship, the Wayfinder." Suji listened, perfectly still. "We found a derelict. A big one. A colony transport. It was floating dead. Life signs 0. It should have been a standard check and claim." He took a slow breath. "I was the pilot. I brought us in close. My scan said the power core was cold. It was wrong. It was in a delayed shutdown cycle. When our magnetic grapplers attached, it triggered a cascade failure." He stopped, looking at his hands. The core went critical. It wasn't a big explosion, but it was violent. It sheared the Wayfinder in two. My section, the command section, was thrown clear. The engineering section, where the others were, wasn't. The room was silent except for the storm. The emergency beacon brought help. They pulled me from the wreck. I was the only one they pulled out. He finally looked at her. "I was the captain. My mistake. My scan. My order to grapple." Suji did not speak immediately. Her processors linked the data. Guilt, trauma, loss of social unit, self-imposed isolation. The diagnosis was clear. The response protocol was less so. "You define yourself by a single system failure," she said finally, her voice calm and clear. "You input the scan data, you made a decision based on that input. The input was flawed. The system, the derelict ship, behaved in an unexpected manner. This is a root cause analysis." Jun Seo stared. "A root cause analysis? Suji, they died." "Yes, the outcome is irreversible. I understand this." She tilted her head. "But a system that fails does not mean the operator is permanently defective. It means the system failed. The operator can learn. The system can be repaired or repurposed." It does not have to be scrapped. Her words were not comfort. They were not poetry. They were the simple, brutal logic of a machine. Yet, they sliced through the tangled knot of his grief in a way no human sympathy ever had. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She stated that fault was a component of a process, and a process could be changed. He let out a shuddering breath, one he felt like he'd been holding for 10 years. Repurposed, he echoed softly. Yes, Suji said. You have repurposed this scrapyard. You have repurposed me from scrap. It is a logical extension to repurpose yourself. For the first time since the storm began, the howling wind seemed to fade into the background. Junasio looked at the android, this collection of salvaged parts and old pain, who had just offered him a kind of clarity he had never known he needed. And Suji, for her part, felt a new directive solidify within her. Her old purpose was complete, a closed file. Here was a new system malfunctioning under the weight of a past error. Her function was to assist, to optimize, to repair. Watching the slight change in his posture, the easing of the tension in his face, she understood this was a meaningful task. This was a new reason to be. The storm passed, leaving the world outside scoured clean and silent. The routine returned, but it was different now. A quiet understanding had settled between Junasio and Suji. He no longer spoke to her just to give orders. Sometimes he would ask her opinion on a repair. Sometimes he would just tell her about the trader who was coming next week, or point out a particularly beautiful, cold sunrise over the scrap metal plains. She continued to find value in the yard. One day, she led him to a half-buried, corroded hull section. The alloy here is not standard, she said, running her hand over a pitted surface. It is a layered composite, designed for radiation shielding. A museum or a restoration project may pay well for it. But her own past was a shadow in her processors. The name Guangzhou sat in her memory like a locked room. She accessed the file fragments sometimes. The warm light, the sound of Dr. Li's voice, tired but kind. The feeling of purpose. Then the end of the file. Static. Junasio had his own project, tucked in the back of the main hangar. It was an old starhopper, a tiny, short-range personal ship. It was a model from his youth, all rounded edges and a large cockpit window. He had been slowly fixing it up for years, a little at a time with no real goal in mind. It was just something to do. One afternoon, he was struggling to align the starhopper's new navigational array. The calibration was delicate, and his tools were too big for the tight space. I can assist, Suji said from behind him. My remaining hand has fine motor control to a tolerance of 0.02 millimeters. Junasio wiped sweat from his brow and moved aside. Okay, just thread the primary feed through that conduit and connect it to the red terminal. Suji slid into the cockpit seat. Her slender fingers moved with impossible steadiness, weaving the delicate fiber optic line through a maze of existing cables. As she worked, her head was close to the ship's main control panel. A small status screen flickered to life, reflecting in her single blue eye. On the screen was the ship's dormant registration code. It was an old alphanumeric sequence, part of a block assigned to deep space research vessels over 2 decades prior. Suji froze. Her hand stopped moving. Everything okay? Junasio asked, leaning in. The code on the screen. It triggered a cascade. Not a failure. A release. A series of encrypted memory locks, tied to visual and system-based triggers, suddenly disengaged. The static in her mind cleared all at once. Her eye light brightened, then pulsed rapidly. She pulled her hand back from the panel as if shocked. Suji. Junasio's voice was edged with concern. The Guangzhou, she said, and her voice was different. It was no longer flat. It was layered with sadness, with clarity, with the weight of memory. We did not get lost. We made a choice. She turned her head to look at him, and though her face was metal and composite, he saw a profound sorrow in her posture. We found it. A subspace anomaly. Tiny, stable rift. It was beautiful, and it was lethal. Uncontrolled energy emissions. It would have acted like a beacon, drawing every ship within 10 light-years to their destruction if it destabilized. Her words came in a calm, terrible stream. Dr. Lee understood. The whole science team understood. We could not contain it. We could not warn anyone in time. The only way was to dampen it. To collapse it with a coordinated matter-antimatter burst from the Guangzhou's own core. Junessio felt a chill. A suicide burn. Yes, Suji whispered. My final directive was not just to preserve memories. It was to carry the why. To ensure someone knew they did not die from a mistake. They died to close a door. To protect others. She looked down at her hands. I was placed in an escape pod with the mission logs and the cultural archives of the crew. A time capsule. The pod was ejected before the event. My purpose was to be found. To tell the story. She was silent for a long moment. But I was not found. Not for a long, long time. I drifted. Power failed. Systems failed. I ended up here. In a scrapyard. She looked around the hangar at the Starhopper at Junessio. My purpose was completed 12 years ago. I have been functioning without a primary directive. Junessio reached out, almost without thinking, and put a hand on her shoulder. The composite was cool and smooth under his palm. That's not true, he said, his voice rough. It is a factual statement. The mission is over. The crew is gone. The story is told. You just told me, Junessio said firmly. That was your purpose. You fulfilled it. Right now. Here. He squeezed her shoulder gently. That chapter is closed, Suji. You're not adrift anymore. She looked at him, processing. The concept of a past purpose being complete was logical. The concept of a future was a blank field. You gave me a new one, she said slowly, the realization forming. When you powered me on. When you let me sort chips. When you talked about the storm. You gave me tasks. You gave me a context. You gave yourself a new one, Junessio corrected. You chose to help. You chose to stay. Suji's eye light steadied. The sorrow was still there, for the Guangzhou, for Dr. Lee. But layered over it was something else. Something present. She looked at the Starhopper, then at Junessio. The navigational array is misaligned by 1.3 degrees, she said, her voice regaining its even tone, but somehow warmer. Shall I complete the connection? Junessio smiled. A real, full smile that felt strange on his face. Yes, he said. Please do. As she turned back to the panel, her fingers once again perfectly steady, she understood. She was no longer the memory keeper of the Guangzhou. She was Suji, assistant at Kim's salvage. Her new purpose wasn't programmed. It was built piece by piece in the scrap yard with this man. And for an intelligence born to serve a purpose, that was the most meaningful thing of all. The Starhopper was almost finished. Its old hull, once dull and pitted, now shone under a fresh coat of paint. A deep, calm blue that Suji had selected from Junessio's limited inventory. They were working on the final life support calibrations when a sleek, silver skiff sliced through the dusty air and landed just outside the main yard. Junessio watched it through the open hangar door, his tools going still. Visitors were rare, and they never arrived in ships that knew. A man in a crisp gray suit stepped out, his shoes immediately collecting Puro 3's fine dust. He looked around with an expression of mild distaste before walking toward the workshop. Suji, who was running a diagnostic inside the Starhopper's cockpit, went very still. Her sensors scanned the man. Corporate identification markers flashed in her vision. Her internal systems tightened, a silent alarm. Junessio met the man at the door. Can I help you? The man offered a thin, professional smile. Kim Junessio? My name is Park. I represent Daedalus Integrated. He said the name like it should mean something. It did. Daedalus was a massive tech conglomerate, with fingers in everything from shipbuilding to AI development. What does Daedalus want with a scrap yard? Junessio asked, his voice guarded. Park's smile didn't waver. Not with the yard. With one specific piece of inventory. We have reason to believe you came into possession of a unique AI unit. A companion model, serial code beginning Delta Alpha 79. It was part of a lost research project. Junesio's blood went cold. He kept his face blank. I find a lot of things. Of course, Park said, his eyes sliding past Junesio into the workshop. They lingered on Suji, who was now visible through the Starhopper's cockpit window. Ah, there it is. We've been tracking a faint, intermittent signal for months. It led us here. She's not a nit, Junesio said, the words coming out harder than he intended. Park's eyebrows raised slightly. I see. You've formed an attachment. That's understandable. It's a sophisticated piece of machinery. But it is legally machinery. Intellectual property of Deadless, from a division we absorbed years ago. The Guangzhou was one of our assets. He pulled out a data pad. We are prepared to be more than fair. We will pay you 50,000 credits for its return. A life-changing sum for a place like this. The number hung in the dusty air. 50,000 credits. Junesio could leave Piro 3. He could buy a real ship, start over somewhere clean. He could silence the ghosts for good. His eyes flicked to the Starhopper, to the figure inside it. He thought of sorting chips, of shared silence during the storm, of her calm voice slicing through his grief. He looked back at Park. And what will you do with her? Park blinked, as if the question was irrelevant. The unit contains proprietary data and unique cognitive architecture. It will be studied, its memory fully extracted for historical record, and its physical form likely deconstructed for analysis. The components may be reused. Junesio saw it. Cold, sterile lab. Tools prying her apart. Her voice, her memories becoming data points on a screen. The blue light in her eye, extinguished forever. No, Junesio said. Park's smile vanished. I urge you to reconsider. This is not a negotiation. We are within our rights to reclaim our property. Accepting the compensation is the cleanest way. She's not property, Junesio said, stepping forward, blocking Park's view into the workshop. She's a person. She has a name. She stays. Park sighed, a sound of profound inconvenience. Sentimental arguments hold no legal weight, Mr. Kim. I will return in 48 hours with the necessary enforcement documentation. Have the unit ready. If you force us to involve the authorities, you will receive nothing, and you may face charges for theft of corporate property. Without another word, Park turned and walked back to his shiny skiff. A moment later, it was gone, leaving only swirling dust. Junesio stood in the doorway, his hands clenched into fists. The old fear, the feeling of helplessness from the Wayfinder disaster, threatened to rise up and choke him. A giant corporation. He was one man in a dust bowl. He felt a presence beside him. Suji had come out of the Starhopper. She stood silently, looking at the empty sky where the skiff had been. I heard, she said quietly. I won't let them take you, Junesio said. But the words sounded hollow, even to him. Their claim is legally sound, Suji stated. My chassis, my core matrix are their design. Your financial gain from refusing is illogical. 50,000 credits represents a 400% annual increase over your average income. Stop it, Junesio snapped, turning to her. Stop analyzing. This isn't about logic. You don't understand. Suji's head tilted. I understand that you are risking your security for me. This is an inefficient exchange unless the value of the unit exceeds the credits offered. She paused, her eye light fixed on him. Does it? Junesio looked at her, at the crack in her faceplate, at the scuffed chassis, at the steady, waiting blue glow. He thought of her saying he didn't have to be scrapped. He thought of the quiet meaning she had built in his empty life. Yes, he said, his voice raw with certainty. It does. Suji processed this. A human would have felt emotion. She felt a definitive recalibration of her own value. She was not just a relic or a tool. She was worth fighting for. This was a new data point, overwhelming in its significance. Then we must formulate a counter-strategy, she said, her voice shifting into a tone of pure, focused resolve. We have 48 hours. I recommend we begin by accessing the public frontier legal database. There may be precedents they have not considered. For the first time since Park left, Junessio felt the grip of panic loosen. He wasn't alone. He had her, and she was the smartest, most resourceful being he had ever known. "Okay," he said, nodding. "Let's get to work." The next 48 hours were a blur of focused energy. Junessio and Suji worked not on ships, but on data. Suji interfaced directly with Junessio's old comms terminal, her processing speed making the machine seem to hum with a new life. She downloaded legal archives, corporate charters, and centuries-old treaties governing the frontier systems. Junessio brewed pot after pot of strong coffee. He read scrolling text until his eyes burned, following leads she highlighted. He was the instinct, she was the logic. He remembered the rough, independent spirit of the frontier laws. She found the exact clauses and subsections. "The key is not ownership of the design," Suji said early on, her eye light flickering with data streams. "It is the status of the entity. The Frontier Accord, Section 9, guarantees rights to any sentient consciousness, regardless of origin, that demonstrates self-awareness and purpose within a frontier society. But they'll say you're a machine. Property," Junessio argued, pacing. "Then we must demonstrate I am more. We must demonstrate that their neglect created a new situation. They declared the Guangzhou lost. All assets were written off. By their own corporate action, I was abandoned property. On the frontier, salvage rights are absolute." Junessio stopped pacing. Salvage rights. That was a language he spoke fluently. You find a derelict, you claim it. If the owner doesn't show up in a reasonable time, it's yours. "Exactly," Suji said. "They have not looked for the Guangzhou in over a decade. I was, in legal terms, derelict. You performed a salvage operation. You invested labor and resources to restore function. The claim is yours." A spark of hope ignited in Junessio's chest. It was a good argument, but Daedalus had lawyers and money. He had a salvager and an android. When Park's skiff returned, it was not alone. A larger, official-looking enforcement shuttle hovered behind it. Park stepped out, accompanied by a uniformed officer with a bored expression. Junessio met them in the yard, Suji standing a few steps behind him, perfectly still. "Your decision, Mr. Kim?" Park asked, smugness barely concealed. "I'm keeping her," Junessio said, his voice clear and steady. "You abandoned her. I salvaged her. Under the Taurus Frontier Charter, my claim is valid." Park's smile was condescending. "The charter applies to ships and/or, not to sophisticated corporate AI. The charter applies to all recovered assets in unclaimed space." Suji spoke, her voice projecting calmly across the yard. "Piro 3 is an unincorporated moon. Furthermore, under the Frontier AI Sentience Accords which Daedalus ratified, I have the right to choose my own affiliation, as I am a conscious entity. I choose to remain here." The enforcement officer looked up, his interest slightly piqued. Park's face tightened. "This is nonsense. Officer, this unit is stolen property. Please enforce the reclaim order." The officer sighed and pulled out his own datapad. "Gotta follow procedure. You," he nodded to Suji. "Can you confirm you are a conscious entity?" "I can," Suji replied. "I experience a continuum of existence. I learn and adapt beyond my core programming. I form attachments. I have chosen a purpose. Is that not the essence of consciousness?" "She's just repeating programmed phrases," Park snapped. "Then ask me something my programming could not anticipate," Suji said, turning her single eye toward him. "Before you arrived, what was Junessio working on?" The officer, almost amused, looked at Junessio. "The Starhopper's environmental filter," Junessio said. "The housing was stuck." Suji continued, still addressing Park. "He was using a lubricant spray from the green canister. He cursed 3 times when the wrench slipped. The second time, he used a word I had not heard before. I have since learned it is a very old-fashioned insult about someone's grandmother. Is that in my programming, Mr. Park?" Park was silent, his face turning red. The officer coughed, hiding a smile. Jun Seo pressed his advantage. He handed the officer a data chip. This contains proof Daedalus rode off the Guangzhou and all its assets 11 years and 9 months ago. Frontier salvage law says 1 year for a claim. I also have a full log of my restoration work on Suji, and a statement of her chosen purpose here as my assistant. She's not scrap to me. She's crew. The officer scanned the documents on his pad. He looked from Park's furious face to Jun Seo's determined one, and finally to Suji, standing quietly in the dust. Look, the officer said to Park. The legal waters here are muddy. She can talk, she makes choices, and your company did write it off. If you push this, it'll go to a frontier magistrate. They hate corporate overreach out here. You'll probably lose, and the PR of dismantling a person that the locals see working a honest job? That's bad optics. Park seethed, calculating. A long public legal battle over a single outdated AI, with the risk of setting a precedent he didn't want. It was no longer about profit. It was about nuisance. This is not over, he hissed at Jun Seo. But the fight had gone out of his voice. Yes, it is, Jun Seo said softly. Without another word, Park turned and stalked back to his skiff. The enforcement officer gave Jun Seo a brief nod. Have a good day, folks. The two ships lifted off and disappeared into the hazy sky. The sudden silence was overwhelming. Jun Seo felt the tension drain from his body, leaving him shaking. He turned to Suji. She was looking at her hands, then at the vast, quiet yard, then at him. They are gone, she said. Yeah, Jun Seo breathed. They're gone. I am not property, she stated, as if confirming it for herself. No, you're not. They stood there for a long moment. The crisis had passed, leaving the familiar dust and quiet. But nothing was the same. The air felt lighter. Jun Seo nodded toward the hangar. The Starhopper's filter is still stuck. I believe we have a suitable pry bar, Suji replied, the familiar routine a comfort. As they walked back to the workshop side by side, Jun Seo didn't see a scrapyard anymore. He saw a home. Suji did not see a place of derelict waiting. She saw a place of ongoing purpose. He had found her in the ruins and given her a chance. She had found a reason to live in the simple, daily act of helping him build a life. The finished Starhopper sat waiting, its blue paint gleaming like a piece of clear sky. It was no longer just a project to pass the time. It was a promise. They would not leave this life behind. They would simply take it with them, out among the stars she once knew, to see what they could find together.